go ahead and finish the class, like we got it scheduled, I don't think. I think everybody's probably okay with that. I know most of us are probably still working, out and about, but, main thing is if you feel bad, don't make it a priority to be here. I know they're trying to limit group size to, small as possible to keep the spread down. We can catch it, walking into the gas station, who knows? So, if you feeling bad, don't worry about being here. We'll figure out something else. But we'll meet next Tuesday, and then probably the 31st, which is the Tuesday before the test. So that gives us the 24th and the 31st plus the night. So it gives us 3 nights to kind of shore up everything and get ready for the test if they're gonna hold it. The way things have gone as far as government closing stuff down, shutting stuff down, they probably won't do the test, but I don't know that. That's totally up to them. It kind of seems that if A&M is one putting it on and they've got classes out and not, getting back after spring break, then I don't know why they would do the test, but if you've signed up and you're on the books to go, just be prepared to go. I mean, if it comes down to it, and then again, if it shows up that it's not there, then I guess you got a little reprieve and some more time to study. I don't know as far as where all this is as far as the coronavirus and all that. Most of y'all still working? And what I found with most of my contractors is that, it's, you got to.
Yeah.
You kind of got to get out and make it happen. You can't do much sitting at the house.
Can't be afraid anyway.
I know.
If
They
y'all hear me
actually
cough, it's bronchitis, just letting y'all know.
do what?
If y'all hear me cough, it's bronchitis.
That's not.
No.
Have you been tested? Do we need to screen you before you walk in the door? I know there's a lot of scuttlebutt about a lot of stuff about it. I know my wife works for a dentist, and basically they're closing the doors for 3 weeks as a recommendation from the ADA, American Dental Association. Didn't have to, but they decided to. I guess that's good. I mean, if I was working in somebody's mouth, I'd probably be a little bit more concerned. We've at least got the ability to have some space, so you're not getting sprayed with water or spit or whatever. If you're the hygienist or assistant, you're right there in it. So I was told to work from home for the next 2 weeks, and it's kind of I guess that I'm the second string. They don't want me being up there if the office gets contaminated. If everybody gets contaminated in the office, of course, shut it down for 2 to 3 weeks. So they told me to stay and work from home, which I can do. And if it gets contaminated, they'll clean it up, disinfect it, and I get to go man the store. So kind of the backup team, which makes sense. And of course, I can work from home, so it's not a big deal. But I guess just the fact that if I had to go up there and run it, I've run it before and I can do it again, and it's not a big deal. But it's just some odd times that with all that's going on. So if you feel uncomfortable about being in the group for class, I understand. But I did not want to not have class, especially if there's the possibility some of you are going to test on the 3rd. So we got time. We'll go ahead and try and fit in everything that we can and make sure that you're as prepared as possible. Let's look at this little backflow quiz. It's part of the text. The guy who wrote the text makes it up as 4 sections to the test. One of them's backflow. I've got 3 more tests here. Sample tests is what I'll call them. They're pretty good. I mean, Phil, the guy who wrote the book, me, the other teachers, we don't know what's on the test. We've got a pretty good idea, but we don't know questions. But it's a pretty good trial to see how, kind of see how you're doing. See, maybe this is the style of questions that you'll see. Make you think a little bit. Backflow, meant to get you thinking about it because it is still there. talked about it the first night or two of class. Remember, there's one section of the test that's nothing but backflow. So, make sure you get back on it and study it. So this will be a pretty good indicator as to maybe what you need to look back on. The first question, asked, and he does it a little bit differently. He kind of is very generic and, multiple devices. Typically, I think the questions will be more specific to one device rather than a bunch of them like he does, which devices are for back siphonage, that kind of thing. Still, it makes you think about, the usage and so forth. First question, which device, or devices can stop back siphonage? And first of all, you gotta understand what back siphonage is. Back siphonage is the water being drawn back in from a subatmospheric, something like a break in the main line or something like that. It's water being sucked back in to the main line. And the devices that can handle it are the pressure vector, the PVB, the DCA, which is the double check, the RP, and the AVB, the atmospheric vacuum breaker. So all four mechanical devices can handle the back siphonage. Then it's which devices can stop back pressure. Back pressure is pressure on the downstream side forcing water back through the meter or into the public water supply. The devices that can handle back pressure are the double check and the RP. There is a chart in the book, in that little handout we did looks something kind of like this. It's got all the different devices and what they're good for: back siphonage, back pressure, continuous pressure. That's a good little chart to help with that style of question, to get an idea of what device is used for what. The constant, which device can handle the constant pressure? That's the RP, the double check, and the pressure vacuum breaker. Constant pressure being pressure that is the pressure on the device for more than 12 hours at a time. Sprinkler systems, because it's on the main line. Main line is the pressure line. It's under constant pressure. It's going to have to be a device with a spring in it. All three of those devices have spring loaded check valves in them. The PVB has one. The double check and the RP have two, but they're still spring loaded, so they can handle that constant pressure. For the approved backflow devices for non-health hazards include, now that requires that you understand what non-health is. Remember, non-health is anything that changes the taste, color, smell of the drinking water, but is not going to, may make you sick, but it's not going to cause death. So if you understand what non-health is, maybe you have a better idea of which device can handle it. But all the devices can handle the non-health: the AVB, the pressure vacuum breaker, the double check, and the RP. So they all can handle the non-health. Which devices are approved where there is a chemical applied by aspiration, injector, or emissions? Be like a fertilizer injector on a sprinkler system. And there used to be some of those. There was a couple of contractors probably 10 years ago or so that it was a good idea to help the homeowner with fertilization. So they put a little aspiration device on the sprinkler system. They dropped tablets down in there, and as the system ran, it would bring in a small amount of fertilizer and fertilize the yard. You probably put insecticides in there as well, depending if it was a water soluble type deal. But that type of device that puts chemicals into the water would only be served by an RP, which is a reduced pressure. Remember, the reduced pressure has a way to get the infected or the bad water to atmosphere. It dumps. It's got that differential relief valve in the middle between the two checks, and it recognizes back pressure or a drop in the pressure on the incoming side. Any difference between one, the incoming to the outgoing, any difference in pressure, it opens up and gets it to atmosphere. And that's what you got to have when you've got a high hazard or a health hazard situation. That would be a chemical injection. That'd be something that, depending on what the chemical is, could possibly kill you. 6, if there is an on-site sewage facility which backflow is approved, there again implementing the RP. The reason for that is in 2010, when they redid some of the laws, they went in and looked at things, and one of the things they realized is in Texas, especially in some of the rural parts of Texas, a lot of the homes have aerobic wastewater systems. They also have a lot of leach line. The leach line aren't as big a deal because it's gravity, it's gradient pressure or water released through those leach lines, so it's not under pressure. But the aerobic systems have a pump in them. They have a pump that disperses the water that's been treated over time chemically or whatever and puts it out over the yard to get it back into the groundwater and filter out and then go through the natural filtering process again. They say that the water that comes out of an on-site sanitation facility is 99% clean. I'm not taking a chance on 1% and drinking it. But because it is on site with the irrigation system, you are going to have to run an RP. There's a possibility of somebody, homeowner, something cross-connecting lines, and if you've got a pump in that tank that turns on and sprays the water through those aerobic heads, shouldn't happen, but it could. If that pump comes on and pumps water back through the irrigation system, it could create a back pressure situation. Therefore, you need an RP. So anytime you have an on-site sanitation facility, whether aerobic or a leach line, you're supposed to have an RP on the sprinkler system. If major maintenance has to be performed, which backflow device has to be properly installed prior to the repair work being performed? That is going to be it's kind of an odd question, but what it's getting at is that if you go onto a job site and you've got to do major upgrade, and let's say it's a 20-year-old sprinkler system, and all they had was 2 spring-loaded check valves that were PVC, and the local code now is a double check. Well, when you go in there and you do work and you upgrade it, you've also got to upgrade the backflow device. And that's becoming more and more prevalent as we see older systems and we see rules like the on-site sanitation facility. So if you go to a job and it's got to have the valves replaced or main lines breaks or something like that, or the tie-in needs to be redone, then you would need to upgrade it to the right backflow device. So keep that in mind. And there for a while, there were a few contractors that were I think they were trying to hit a home run on that, and they go out to fix a broken head by the driveway, and tell the homeowner, well, you gotta have a double check. You don't have a backflow device. You gotta have a double check. It's gonna cost $1,200. Granted, I'm all about making money. Job's too hard, but gouging somebody's a different story. So. Kind of setting a bad tone there for a while. Had a city call me, a guy from the city, assistant city manager called me and said, hey, I just got a call from this homeowner. She's furious because the contractor told her it was going to be $1,200 for the double check in. What's the rule? And I said, well, number one, it's your water. You're the city, you're providing the water. You make the rule that it's got to be upgraded, it's got to be upgraded. The state rule says anytime you're on the main line, which would be from the valve back to the meter, the source, anytime you get into there, you need to bring it up to code. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything about fixing the sprinkler head out the yard. And so he ended up calling the lady back and told her, tell the contractor to take time. She wasn't doing the double check because she didn't have to. And she did, realistically. Probably the way to handle that is to make the homeowner aware. Hey, I noticed, you don't have a double check. Current code is to have a double check on the sprinkler system. If you have major stuff done in the sprinkler system, you'll need to upgrade that. That way they're prepared, rather than dropping a $1,200 to $1,300 bomb on them at one time and getting the whole world stirred up. So just keep in mind that on an older system, it needs to be an approved device. Bringing it up to what current code is if you're on the major part of the system. 8, if Including a master valve, where does it have to be installed? Really kind of gets away from the backflow, but, just, just so you'll know, it needs to be downstream from the pressure vacuum breaker, the double check, or the RP. You don't want a on-off device prior to it. You want the devices to remain pressurized, so you put a master valve. A master valve is on the sprinkler system, and what it does is it's tied to the pump circuit. The pump circuit, anytime that controller kicks on, it's hot. It sends a current out. So that valve opens up and runs the whole time that controller runs. So normally you have a common wire and a section wire going to each valve. So if you've got 5 valves, you've got a white wire that goes to all 5, and then you've got a red, a green, a blue, an orange, a yellow. And each zone runs individually. Well, if you have a master valve, you put it on the main line out by the source. In this case, you have the meter, the backflow, then you have the master valve. Anytime the controller comes on, station 1 through 5, that valve is on. Why do you use it? Some people use it as a safety feature. Typically, when a valve fails, it fails in the open position. Usually a diaphragm issue or debris. It'll fail open. So you'll get a phone call, hey, my sprinkler system is running and it won't shut off. I unplugged the controller. The controller shows to be off. It don't matter. It's hydraulic. If that electricity, the valve is shut off, the current is gone. It's a hydraulic issue. There's trash in there, the diaphragm's bad. It can't balance pressure between the top and the bottom, so it just stays open and runs. And people will freak out over it. So a master valve, it gives you kind of a second defense. Put it in on the main line. 2 valves would actually have to be stuck open in order for it to run like that continuously. It's a selling feature. It's not used as much as it used to be. It can be a service nightmare, because if you get the master valve going out and you don't know there's a master valve, nothing else runs, and it just makes sometimes makes service. A lot of times people, guys will call and say, hey man, I can't get the system to run. I said, well, you have a master valve. Well, how do I know? A couple of things we'll check, and find out you got a master valve, cut it out, or put a new one in, or diaphragm or solenoid, whatever, and usually it goes working. But a lot of guys have gotten away from using the master valve, but that's what it's for. It kind of overrides, not really overrides, but it's the master. It's in charge. It runs the whole time the system runs. So stations 1 through 5, it's open and running. Then it should shut down along with once the last station shuts off. Once the controller goes into that stall mode. So anyway, it needs to be placed after the backflow. You want the backflow device to be under constant pressure. Double checks, not so much, but RPs especially. Because if you shut them on and off a bunch, that differential relief valve tends to spit, dump water. When it kicks on, it may dump water and not block off like it should. So after the backflow device is the best place. 9, which devices have to be tested upon installation and annually? Devices used in applications designated as health hazard. Health hazard meaning anything sickness and or death. So in applications that require health hazard, they have to be inspected when they're installed and then annually thereafter. Now, I think I mentioned to you about backflow certification. That's not a bad idea. We just had a class. His boss got, or two you guys you work with got certified. If you're doing enough sprinkler work, number one, you can test your own installs. Saves you $50, $100 on the top end of the job. You can also do annual testing. $100 for about 15 minutes worth of work, 20 minutes worth of work. It's not bad, especially when it's slow season. I've got some folks that I test for. I tested one today over in Athens, a dentist office. It's on a high hazard because it's a medical facility. It's an RP, and it's got to be done. It's got to be done annually. There's an opportunity for some income. I did it for him for free since teeth. Keep that in mind as moving forward, once you start getting CEUs. You get CEUs, you get 12 hours of CEU credit for taking that class. You need 24 in the first 3 years, so if you take a 40-hour class, you get 12 hours of CEU credit. It kind of makes the cost of that class a little more tolerable. The cost of that class is about $600, 40 hours, about like this, but it does give you the opportunity to make some extra money. So keep that in mind when you're getting into your CEUs. There's a guy that comes out here and teaches them every so often. Might be a worthwhile deal, but high hazard devices inspected upon installation and every year after. Sprinkler systems right now, the way it is, if you put a double check on sprinkler systems, it's upon installation and every 3 years. That may change. There's some political stuff going on in Austin as far as water protection and so forth, and it may be that we're all using RPs by the end of the year. I don't know, so we'll see. But just keep in mind, they have to be tested annually regardless. Number 10, which backflow devices have to be tested upon installation? All of them do. 11, if a double check assembly is installed below grade, what device is required? If you installed a double check assembly in 2010 when they changed the rules because there was so much crap about having a device above grade, freezing, statics and all that, they allowed them to put it below grade. Well, one of the things they said, if you put a double check in the ground, which a lot of them are, you have to have a Y strainer. The Y strainer keeps the dirt and debris from fouling that device, and it's something that's a serviceable item. So when you do your tie-in, you'll cut into your main line, tee off, you'll set the Y strainer. Let me take that back. You'll set the ball valve, the Y strainer, and then the double check. But the Y strainer has to be used if the device is installed below grade. You also have to have the plugs in the test cock so debris doesn't get in there. 12, so D was your answer on 11. 12, if there is an additional water source supplying water to a system being supplied by a potable water supply, which device has to be used in the potable water supply? That would be D and RP. Additional water source. Pump from a lake. If you've got a sprinkler system that's running community water, and then you've got a pump that there's possibility of tying onto the sprinkler system to run lake water, because, let's face it, lake water is probably a better source of water for the lawn and shrubs than city water, because it doesn't have bromine, hydrogen, whatever else they put in drinking water to make it safe. So the lake water is probably a better source, and it could be less expensive in the long run. So some people may try and go back and forth between the two. Just be sure that if you've got a public water supply with a lake pump type system, that you have to have the RP on there to keep it protected.
When in doubt, go with RP.
When in doubt, now there may be a question or two on there that is specific. Don't always just go through and do RP. If it's specific, like below grade or something, then it's got to be a double check. So just make sure you're anything high hazard, chemical, medical, food industry, all that has to be RPs. So just don't get too carried away with me on the RP. It is the best device,
That's what Curtis told me.
but it's expensive. You're looking at $300 for a 1-inch RP versus about $130 for a double check. So plus you've got 12 pounds of loss for an RP versus 4 pounds of loss. So there is some give and take, but for the test, just make sure you put the best answer, and it may not always be RP, but it is by far the best device. Which device cannot be used when there is a health hazard? That's going to be C, a double check. There again, it does not have a way of getting any of that contaminated water out. So if it fails internally, there is a passage for the contaminated water back and forth. So anytime you have a health hazard, it's going to have a way to dump it to atmosphere. RP or pressure vacuum breaker. Both those are used for the health hazard. 14, an AVB and a PVB can be used in health hazard situations if the following conditions are not present. The answer is E, A, B, and C. So if back pressure is not present, if there's not a pump downstream, and if there are no chemicals added. So those three answers would apply for a pressure vacuum breaker and an atmospheric vacuum breaker. Remember, both of those have a single check for most practical purposes. The PVB has the spring-loaded check, the AVB has the disc that floats up and down. They're both open to atmosphere, so if they have a failure, they'll dump to atmosphere, but, so they can be used for high hazard. But just remember that, certain things cannot be present: back pressure, pump, and chemicals. An atmospheric vacuum breaker, and the answer for 15 is B. It has to be installed 6 inches higher than the highest head or outlet in the retracted position. It will not handle constant pressure and will stop back siphonage. So that some of those conditions upon installation that you have in the book, go back over those. Make sure you're aware of how they're installed, what conditions they can handle, back pressure, back siphonage, high hazard, non-health, and all that. Those are all good test questions. 16, what is the unwanted reversal of water flow in an irrigation system? That would be D, backflow. And that's one of those kind of simple questions. You may look at it and think, oh yeah, I got this one. They may have backflow, back pressure, back siphonage, all those is, possible answers. Just make sure that you got the right one. Backflow is the undesirable reversal of flow, unwanted reversal of water flow. 17, as cross connection is any actual or potential connection between a potable water supply and B. That's another good question right there. Any source that has the possibility to introduce pollutant or contaminated water back into the potable water that it is supplying. So if you've got a situation where you cut into the drinking water, the public water, and you can potentially put contaminated water back in, hose bibs. That's a spot where you can put in, you can put a hose on it and clean out your septic system or whatever and possibly get contaminated. So, tying in with a double check or a backflow preventer for a sprinkler system, tying on for a auto fill for a pool, all those things are possibilities of places where cross connection can be made. 18, back siphonage is caused by A, negative or subatmospheric pressure. 19, back siphonage can be caused by D, which is A and C, a break in a city main, the fire department using water from the city fire hydrant to put out a fire. All those are going to suck water back through, so it's back siphonage, the water's being sucked back through. 20, if the pressure of the sprinkler system on the downstream side exceeds the pressure on the supply side, what phenomena is occurring? That's back pressure. So anytime you're through the backflow device and you have higher pressure that's being created, it's trying to push it back. It's back pressure. Okay. 21, what can cause back pressure? Gravity or a pump. 22, how many total ways are there to protect against back pressure and or back siphonage? There are 5. There are 4 mechanical: AVB, pressure vacuum breaker, double check, and RP, and then air gap. That's the physical separation. That's the one that's different. Now the rest of them are mechanical. 23, what is the unobstructed vertical distance through free atmosphere between the lowest point of the water supply outlet and the flood level rim of a fixture or assembly into which the outlet discharges? E, air gap. Kitchen sink. I know that's a real wordy question, but I can promise you that one will show up on there. 25, what's a typical example of an air gap? Kitchen sink. 24, the vertical physical separation of an air gap must be D, at least twice the diameter of the water supply outlet, but never less than 1 inch. Okay. 26, what is the maximum number of hours an atmospheric vacuum breaker can have constant pressure? 12 hours is the limit. That's the number to look for there when they're talking about constant pressure, 12 hours. Anything over that is constant. How high does a pressure vacuum breaker have to be installed? D, 12 inches above the highest head or outlet in the retracted position. Now, remember, AVB is 6. Pressure vacuum breaker is 12. Okay, I know there's kind of odd, why is one different than the other, but just for whatever reason, make sure that you've got the difference between the two, because I can guarantee you, if they ask, what's the distance a pressure vacuum breaker has to be installed, it's gonna say 6, 12. So know which one's which. Okay. How many test cocks does a pressure vacuum breaker, a double check, and a RP have respectively? A PVB has 2. One on the incoming side of the check, one on the discharge side of the check. That way you can test it to see if it's doing its job. Double check and RP have 4. They have one on the pressure side of things, then they have one in front of the number 1 check, one in between, and one on the discharge side. So the RP and the double check each have 4 apiece. If the highest head at the side is a shrub spray on a 12-inch riser, how high would the pressure vacuum breaker have to be installed to be, if right next to that head? Okay, so remember, pressure vacuum breaker is 12 inches above the highest downstream head. So if you've got a head that's 12 inches above grade, you're going to have to go 24 inches with the pressure vacuum breaker. And there'll be a question along that line on the test about, something along, about if the highest head is 18 inches, what's the height of the pressure vacuum breaker? You'd have to be 30 inches. So, be prepared for knowing, knowing that. It's just simple math. 30, which backflow devices incorporate 2 check valves? The double check and the RP. Remember, the descriptions are very much similar. 2 spring-loaded check valves, properly located test cocks, blah, 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 2 shutoffs. The difference is the RP, it has an independently acting pressure differential relief valve in the description somewhere. But they both have 2 check valves on the device. Which backflow devices can be installed below grade? Local regulation permitting, that's going to be the double check, DC, that's going to be the only one. Can't put an RP, can't put a PVB, can't put an AVB, because they dump to atmosphere. You stick them below ground in a ball. If they start dumping, what's happening? Filling up. Well, if it goes to fail, it can suck all that dirty water back up into the device. So it's got to be above grade. They have to have physical separation below them for those 3. Double check, it's enclosed, it can be put in the ground. How many test cocks are there on the double check, RP, PVB, and AVB respectively? Double check and RP both have 4. The PVB has 2, and an AVB, 0. There's no test cocks on it. The test for it is not really hard at all, but there is a test for it. But it's pretty simple, so it doesn't require test cocks. 33, which backflow device uses a pressure differential relief valve and has to be installed 12 inches above grade? That's going to be the RP. There are 2 ball valves on which of the following? D, A, and C, the double check and the RP. 35, the phenomenon that causes water to backflow due to elevation or a pump is called back pressure. Is that it?
What'd you say 33 was?
33, which backflow devices use differential? That's the RP, that's A.
What about 29?
I'm sorry,
Did you break your glass?
I left my good pair at the house. And when I went out to my truck, I was like, I went out and grabbed these, and these are like jacked up. Sleeping in them and everything else. So they're just cheaters, but everything's blurred without them. 29. I knew I couldn't hide it on that one. 24 inches, D. 12 inches above highest downstream header outlet. Okay, how did y'all do on that? Give you a good, kind of a good reading on where you need to be, what you might need to look at, study over, and probably a good source of study material, really. Just go back over it and review it. Before we get through, I've got the other three sections. I got a hydraulic, I got a design, and I've got an installation. So the other three I've got in test form. I'll throw some of those out there, and we'll see how you do on it, and it gives you some questions to think about and look for. Okay, hydraulic 08, I think y'all took that home. Did you spend any time over it?
Last night.
Well, if you waited a week and you remembered everything, that's good.
Did it about 2 hours ago.
Took me minutes to get back in. the
You did it
room,
2
but I
hours
did it.
ago, okay? But we did it, right? Is that what I'm hearing? Good. Means you at least, spend a little time thinking about class over the break. I guess if you get that out, and I can take a look at it, just kind of see, how the answers kind of shore up. I've got a couple of other ones we can work on. So, have I given y'all the elevation worksheets? I don't think I have at this point, have I? Okay, let's talk about that. Then I'll give you another hydraulic to work on. Okay, static pressure when water is still. Is pressure that's on the system, is built from water towers, whatever. The city system has a certain amount of pressure that it provides. Now, granted, the water purveyor really only has to provide about 35 pounds of pressure. So don't get a real attitude if you show up to a job and you do a pressure check and you've only got 32 pounds of pressure, and don't get to pick up the phone and start bellyaching and bitching because they may tell you tough. All we got to provide is 30. And that's probably about true because that gives enough pressure to the house to run a sink, to flush a commode, all that. Their priority is not to give you enough pressure for your sprinkler system. So, we want to check static pressure and see where we're at. We also want to check dynamic pressure. Dynamic pressure differs from static. Static is still. Dynamic pressure is when water's moving. Think of it dynamite, dynamic. It's got energy, it's moving. We could do a dynamic pressure test as well. Go to our hose bib, put our pressure gauge on it. Nothing else. The system's still, not moving. Turn it on, you get a static reading. If you did the same thing, put your pressure gauge on the hose bib, turn water on the back of the house, and let it run out the hose bib. Come back and check it, see what it is. Does it differ much from what your static was? If your static was 68, and you go around there and you do a dynamic, and your dynamic's 32, you've got a problem. You got some type of restriction. So that's just a simple test just to find out if you got good flow pressure, good dynamic pressure, water moving. You don't want to have a whole lot of difference between the two. Seen a lot of instances where service was done, something was changed, turned off, whatever, and all of a sudden the system doesn't work. Well, the ball valve never got all the way back open. Or the gate valve, the gate never rose back up. There's no gate valve, and they turned it, and it never came back up, and it blocked half of it. Those type of instances could cause an issue with dynamic pressure. So you always kind of want to make sure before you do yourself a favor, before you start digging things up, cutting things out, put a hose bib on it and check. I mean, it's a very easy way, before you start designing and putting the system in, do a dynamic versus a static, just check, do a flow test. Take your 5-gallon bucket, put it under the hose bib, turn it on. How long does it take to fill that bucket up? There's 5 gallons of water in that bucket in 15 seconds. Well, 15 seconds is what part of a minute?
Fourth.
It's a fourth. So you would multiply 5 times 4, because you could fill that bucket up 4 times in a minute. tells you you got 20 gallons a minute coming out of that hose bib. That's a pretty good idea to say, I can design my system around 20 gallons per minute. There are other ways you can do that, but that is kind of the layman's way of doing it, cheap and easy. 5-gallon bucket, most everybody's got one on their truck. Got a watch, clock it, and just see how long it takes. If it takes 30 seconds, you can only fill it up twice. So you've only got 10 gallons a minute. So it just gives you an idea of some things you can do on the pressure side of things. Now, elevation can be our friend, it can be our enemy. And it affects that dynamic pressure. Remember, static is steel. I'll give you an example with a water tower, and we'll do some figures on it probably next week. We'll do some elevation, worksheets here without it. But remember, elevation gain is water that's used on a system where there's an increase, there's a rise in elevation from the source, and we lose pressure. The number we're looking for there is by 0.433 for a foot of elevation. So if we have a 10-foot rise from our meter to our valve, vertical rise of 10 feet, that 10-foot rise is going to cost, because we're going up, is going to cost us pressure at a rate of 0.433 per pound, or per foot. So we got 10 foot times 0.433. We lose 4.3 pounds of pressure going from the meter to that point where that valve is. Same thing if we're going downhill. If we're going downhill, we gain. It's elevation loss. We gain pressure going downhill. Like a roller coaster. You get on top of the hill, they cut you loose, and you take off. You gain speed. Same thing with water. If we have a source that's higher than our usage point, we're going to gain pressure at a rate of 0.433 psi per foot of elevation difference. Water tower. Why do you think they stick water 100 foot up in the air in a big bubble? They don't have to use a pump. They use gravity and elevation. So if you've got a 100-foot high column of water, down at the base of that water tower, you're going to have 43 pounds of pressure just by putting water in a tower. You got a 200-foot water tower, you've got almost 90 pounds of pressure at the base of it. So if you look and notice water towers are typically, you can probably see them from just about anywhere, but they're usually on the highest point in most communities. Because everything else is lower, they gain the benefit of that elevation gaining pressure as it goes down to it. So if they go to the highest point, put a water tower, put the water up in there, the house at the bottom of the hill is going to have pretty good pressure. There were places in Tyler, in that kind of that Green Acres, Robert E. Lee type area. There's a water tower back up in there. I think it's on Dulcie or something like that. But there were houses in there that had like 90 pounds of pressure. Because of the height of the water tower and because of everything was so much, everything went down to it. So that's why they do it. Now elevation, what we'll look at with these charts is we'll take into consideration a couple of things. Pressure gain or loss due to vertical rise. We'll also look at pressure loss due to friction. So when we do these elevation worksheets, we're looking for a couple of things. We're looking for, friction loss, like when we're doing our hydraulic calculations. We've got 20-foot pipe, it's 1.5 inches, 32 gallons per minute. What's our loss per 100? Divided by 100, multiplied by our 20 foot. We've got our loss. Anytime we have water moving through pipe, we have a loss. There's no gain, it's always a loss. Friction loss. Now, with elevation, we can have a gain or a loss, depending on usage up from the site or below the site. So when we're doing these elevation worksheets, think of it that way. Two separate things you got to work on. Friction loss, size, length, gallons per minute. Go to the chart, look it up. Loss per 100, divide by 100, multiply by your length, come up with the loss. Elevation, how high? Multiply by 0.433. If it's usage uphill, we lose it. If it's usage downhill, we gain it. So you may have an add or you may have a subtraction on the elevation. Okay? Let me give you these worksheets and we'll kind of talk about it a little bit more. couple of things in the design section, I think, that go along with this on the test. There's a water tower that, you'll probably recognize it once you get to the test, because we'll do it in class. Okay, let's look at what we're given here. And this is, there again, it's just kind of a guess as to what, may show up on the test, but, it kind of covers all the bases. I just titled it the elevation worksheet. There are some givens that you've got. It's all, word problems, so you kind of gotta, think about it in your head. Point A, it says has an elevation of 400 feet. Dynamic pressure at that point was measured to be 80 PSI, so that's a starting point, that's all that is. You're at 400 foot elevation above sea level, you've got 80 PSI. It says point B has an elevation of 415. So from point A to point B, there's a 15-foot change. Okay, that's gonna affect our pressure due to elevation. Then it says point C has an elevation of 450, so you've gone up another 35 feet. And at point D, the elevation is 475, so you've gone up another 25 feet. So the elevation change is going to affect our pressure because it's different than our usage point. Now, the way I typically do this is I do it one step at a time. I don't go back to my original point. What I've got at point A is where I start to go to point B, and then at point C, I start back at point B. So it says calculate the following pressure at the points given a flow of 30 gallons per minute through 1.5-inch pipe. So it's given us all the information we need in the givens. It's given us the elevation difference. Then it tells us we've got 1.5-inch pipe, 30 gallons per minute. And it's got three questions. First one, there's 25 foot of pipe from between points A to B. Okay, so let's think about what we've got to calculate. All right. So we're at 400 foot elevation. That's not showing up real well, is it?
Nope.
I don't know. Happened to be good marker last time.
I thought I'd use a different color.
There we go.
Foot elevation, 80 PSI. Okay, so we're going on the number one. Let's see, got 30 GPM, 1.5-inch pipe. Those are our knowns. Number one says there's 25 foot of pipe from A to B. Okay, so two things to consider. Elevation. It said in the givens that from A to B, there's 15-foot elevation change. And it's going uphill. And there's 25 foot of pipe. Okay. 0.433 is our number. Anytime we're converting elevation to pressure, you multiply it by 0.433. So it says we go from 400 to 415, so there's 15 foot of elevation change. So you take that and multiply it by 0.433. What does it give you? 6 point.
Roughly, yes.
Okay. 6.5 PSI. Now, is this a loss or a gain in pressure?
Why is it a loss?
Because we've gone uphill.
Because you're going uphill. It's like that, it's like that roller coaster, it's gonna take more energy to get uphill, so we're gonna lose it, so this is a loss. Now, this sometimes could be a gain, but right in this instance, it's a loss. And then we've got 25 foot of pipe, 1.5 inch pipe, 30 gallons per minute. What's our loss? We go to our chart and look it up, just like we were doing hydraulics. 1.5 inch pipe, 30 gallons per minute, 1.65. I look at that right? Okay. Cheater did though. 1.65 per 100. Okay, so we take 1.65, divide it by 100, and then multiply it by the 25 foot of pipe. What is our pressure loss in the pipe? 0.41. All right, so we had 80 to start. We subtract 6.5, and then we subtract 0.41 to get our answer at B, or at number 1. Get my answers out. Okay, so we have 73.1 once we went from A, our starting point, to where B is. So if they give you questions like this, just take your time, do it step by step. Find the elevation, gain or loss. Clarify in your mind, is it a gain, is it a loss, am I subtracting, am I adding? Look at the friction length of the pipe. Size, length, gallons per minute. Go to your chart, look it up, come up with your total, and subtract it. Friction loss is always a loss. And then go back to your original points. Now, in the question number 2, we're gonna start right here. We're gonna start at 73.1, do our math, and then subtract or add for elevation, friction loss. Kind of getting it?
A little bit.
Okay, the question number 2 goes from point B to point C. It says there is a 15-foot of pipe. And if you go back to your givens, if you look at point B, you're at 415. When you go to point C, you're at 450. So there's 35 foot of difference. So that's going to be your other missing piece. So you got 35 foot elevation times 0.433. Came up with 57.65. Oh, that's probably your way. We were 73.1, our pipe 15 foot, at 30 GPM, inch and a half, 1.65 divided by 100, times the 15 foot should give us a quarter of a pound of loss, 0.25. 35 foot of elevation times 0.433 is gonna give us 15.2 pounds of loss. So 73.1 minus the 0.25 minus the 15.2 should put us at 57.65. And that would be at point C. Now, we'll do one next time. It'll have a water tower, it'll have rises and falls, and you'll have to look at pipe lengths and all that, and it'll be more in a graph form, something you can look at rather than just a word problem. Okay, then lastly, it goes, we start at 57.65, and we'll work from C to D. Says there's 50 foot of pipe between C and D, so pipe, inch and a half, 30 gallons per minute, and 1.65 divided by 100 times the 50. PSI loss. 25 foot of elevation. With right at 46 pounds of pressure at D.
Yes, I'm positive.
I went out mowing and everything yesterday, so I've been dealing with allergies on pollen. Every time I call them, I'm crap, so I don't think I got it.
From the time that I missed class that one time, I had this cough, and I keep calling the doctor and calling the doctor, going, it'll work itself out. Yeah, well, I'm tired of it working
Then
itself
you got,
out.
then you got pollen and everything floating out, so yeah. Okay, y'all kind of see how that goes as far as the elevation worksheet, how elevation can cause us to lose pressure, can also cause us to gain pressure, and then friction loss in the pipe. The friction loss in the pipe is the same thing we're doing with the hydraulic worksheets. Moving water from point A to point B, size, length, gallons per minute. all you need to know. Okay, wanted to throw that out there, we'll do another one or two of those, kind of get you a little more acclimated. We'll do what I call the water tower worksheet. Huh? Well, it's got elevation and all that on there, so it helps a little bit. We did the layouts with plotting the points and coming up with the square footage and all that, didn't we? In the southwest corner, go over 30-foot plot point.
Think so.
We did. I wanted to make sure we did, because I'll give you some more of some reviews next couple of weeks, just to be sure, but, all right, let's look at we'll be there someday.
I have some that I wear.
Oh, do you?
Too. I just don't have to wear them.
I have to, at this point. Make sure I don't leave it gone. Yeah. Did I give y'all 1198 on the hydraulics? I know I gave you design A, and I think I did 1197.
Hold on, let me find them all.
I show 1197 in A, and then the small one that you took home, that we did in class.
I have 1197.
Okay. So nothing for 99 or 98?
I don't see,
Okay, well, good.
let's see that.
There may have been a reason. print it out.
You said you're gonna have to give us the question?
I'll have to write them up here. I think that was the one thing I forgot to do when I left the office. I got to spell today.
This is 1098, is that what that says?
1098, yes.
I'm just trying to get a closer view, I can't see.
Anyone know a good locksmith around here?
A good one?
A good locksmith? I just like my keys.
Colton might actually be able to do something for you.
She gonna throw him under the bus.
I didn't say nothing.
I mean, if it saves me money.
There's a hanger.
Got a lesson in my truck.
Those don't work a whole lot like they used to.
We can get through the crack somewhere.
If there is one, yeah.
Push a button.
They're checking it out.
You getting hooked up?
They're checking it out.
Firefighter said got to.
They should have brought my glasses. You know what would save you a bunch of time?
What?
Is if we just came and took a picture of the sheet, unless if it has the answers on it.
It does.
Oh.
Well, no, I'll take that back. I've got one sheet that doesn't.
Say, we could just take pictures of it. Save you a whole lot of time writing.
Yeah. I forget about the luxuries of cell phones and all that. Why did you say so?
after trying to get into a car.
He thought it was you that locked yourself out, and he said, man, it's got like a 2-hour. I said, no, not that one.
That's probably one of those. About the time you let it go, you realize that,
I done it one time for running.
oh, no.
He could call the number on the back of his driver's license.
Oh, that's what he's gonna do.
Huh?
What is that gonna do?
Wedge in there, chip in the paint,
Really?
reach in there with a rod and take a lot.
Did you bring your phone in?
Mom has one.
Did you bring your phone in?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
They're pretty cool, I mean, you can damn near get into anything.
Really?
But like, you know, the old, Jimmy,
Slim Jim?
if you, the newer models like that, they have security,
Can't do that.
you can't
I
Jimmy
sent him a
those.
picture of it.
Oh, you did?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then you're good to go. I was writing them on the board and just, they got tired of waiting on me. Felt sorry for me. When you've got the small one, the OA, I'll look at the answers on it, so. you know something. Think? Yo. I think I could get you one or the other, right? Oh, yeah. I mean, so probably one of those, about the time you let go of it, it's
I see them up in here.
there's a, if you want to take a picture of that, that's the only clean copy I got. That's kind of what we decided to do, is just take pictures of it, made it easier.
You don't worry about those questions up there?
No, that's, I was writing them and she's over there trying to bring them back to the 20th century. Or 21st, whatever we're in. In a galaxy far, far away.
I was just trying to save you some time.
Thank you, I do appreciate it. Probably make it a whole lot easier for y'all to see too.
Mm-hmm. You said you're gonna check our homework too?
Yeah, I'll check that, hydraulic 08. You've got it, I'll take a look at it. I can just lay them out, I'll pull them up and see where we're, see if we're too far off. Kobe, did you text me last week asking about the hydraulics? Somebody did.
She was asking me, I was helping her out. She might ask you.
Somebody texted me and asked me about the service line, this, that, and the other, so.
Yeah, it was probably her.
Okay.
She asked me too.
Happiest place on earth, and I didn't,
Catching that corona down there.
yeah, if there was a place to catch it, that might have been it,
Yeah.
other than cruise ship. I've been deciding, I've got it, and they try and put me in one of those little bags like some of those people they were bringing off the ships and, flying back in, they had them in those little incubator bags. They're gonna kill me, cause I can't do it. I will not last. Only reason I got through an MRI was because a nice little friend called Ballard was bagging. I can't be confined.
You don't like tight spaces, huh?
Ooh, no.
And apply Frontier.
I did have a little help up on the plane, just because that's about as tight as I can get, on a plane. Being out of control. A little bit of a control freak. It was quite interesting, called, I guess it was Tuesday, checking in with the guys at the office, one of them lives out here. I said, so, they started talking about closing stuff down, I said, so we don't work next week? Just BSing, because I knew we would. He said, yeah, he said, man, he said, it's crazy. I said, what do you mean? He said, grocery stores out of toilet paper, they're out of meat, they're out of bottled water. I said, dude, what? He said, oh man, it's crazy. I said, you're bullshit, man, there ain't no way, not Bullard. He said, no, he said, seriously. He said, that they're limiting water to 3 cases per family. It's toilet paper, and I'm like, why toilet paper? Last time I checked, this is a respiratory virus, it doesn't have anything to do with the other.
Yeah.
Why are we buying toilet paper like it's going out of stock?
They put the regulations on all of it way too late after everybody swarmed the stores. Like,
Well, I saw a lady over, it was in Malcolm, she said she had to go to, Hoffman in Seagoville, the Walmart's and those places to finally get all the stuff, the groceries that she typically gets.